I was the most feared landlord in 3 counties, or so they said in the market town of Ashfordon, where the farmers paid their rents on time and the solicitors kept their hats on their heads when they crossed the threshold of Ashbourne Park. I had earned that reputation through nothing more dramatic than silence. I did not shout. I did not threaten. I simply waited and listened and made my decisions without consulting the feelings of the room, and people found that colder than fury. I did not mind. I had learned, over 38 years of living inside a family that mistook sentiment for weakness, that a closed face was the only armor that never rusted. My brother Aldous had worn a different armor altogether. He had been the warm one, the one who laughed at dinner, who remembered the names of the housemaids' mothers, who could talk a horse dealer down to half his asking price while making the man feel he had won. Everyone loved Aldous. I had loved Aldous. And when he died 18 months before this story begins, a fever taken in the marshes east of the estate, sudden and stupid and irreversible, I had locked something away in myself that I could not name and did not try to. I tell you this not because I am asking for sympathy. I am telling you because you need to understand what I was when Marin Colville arrived at Ashbourne Park on a Tuesday afternoon in the 3rd week of October, stepping down from a hired coach with a single trunk, a leather traveling case held close against her side, and an expression of such composed, self-contained reserve that my housekeeper, Mrs. Fenworth, came to report it to me as though it were a phenomenon worth documenting. "She is very quiet, Your Grace," Mrs. Fenworth said. "She is a companion," I said. "Quiet is a professional requirement." "She is quiet in a particular way." I looked up from the estate ledger. "What way?" Mrs. Fenworth considered, as though she is counting something. I returned to the ledger. My Aunt Dorothea, who had been unwell since the summer, and who had taken up residence in the East Wing, with the full theatrical commitment that Dorothea brought to everything, had written to me in September requesting that I permit her to engage a companion. She was 64 years old. She had written. She was not well, and she did not wish to spend what remained of her comfortable life attended only by a maid who spoke too loudly and a physician who smelled of pipe tobacco. She had found a young widow, recently arrived in the county, with excellent references from a family in Wiltshire. She wished me to approve it. I had approved it without inquiry. I trusted Dorothea's judgment in people, if not always in the dramatic presentation of her ailments. The companion would live in the East Wing, attend my aunt, take her meals with the household, and otherwise remain in her own orbit. I expected to have very little occasion to notice her. I had, as it turned out, no talent for prophecy. The first time I spoke to Marin Colville at any length was 3 days after her arrival. I had come to the East Wing to take tea with Dorothea, which I did every Thursday as a matter of duty, and if I am honest, something closer to genuine affection. Dorothea was maddening, but she was perceptive, and she had a gift for saying the thing I had not known I needed to hear, and then moving immediately to a topic of no consequence, so that I could absorb it without the indignity of being observed absorbing it. The companion was sitting by the window when I arrived, reading aloud from a book of natural history at what I estimated was precisely the pace Dorothea required, neither too fast to follow nor slow enough to condescend. She stopped the moment I entered, closed the book on her finger to mark the page, and rose. "Your Grace," she said. She was perhaps 26 or 27. I learned later it was 28. Slight, with dark hair arranged simply and a face that was, I search for the word, attentive. Not beautiful in any fashionable sense, but the kind of face that once you had looked at it, arranged itself differently in memory than it had appeared in life, more present somehow, more inhabited. "Please continue," I said. "I would not intrude on your time with Lady Dorothea." "You are reading to Lady Dorothea. That is not intrusion, that is employment." The faintest hesitation, not discomfort precisely, an assessment, "As you prefer, Your Grace." She sat and reopened the book, and resumed at exactly the sentence where she had stopped. Dorothea watched me over her teacup with an expression I recognized and chose to ignore. I stayed for an hour. Mrs. Colville read for 20 minutes of it, then sat quietly with her needlework when Dorothea and I spoke. She did not attempt to contribute. She did not make herself invisible by slumping. She simply attended. When I rose to leave and she rose also, as courtesy required, I noticed that her hands were quite still at her sides. No fidgeting. No searching for something to do with them. It was, I thought, the composure of someone who had learned composure the hard way, not been born to it. That evening I found myself thinking about the leather traveling case she had held so close to her side when she arrived. It was a particular thought, precise and small and unreasonable, and I put it away. October became November. The fens east of the park turned the color of pewter and smelled of cold water and dead reed, and the house settled into its winter rhythm. Fires built up before breakfast, candles lit by 4 in the afternoon, the staff moving through the corridors with that particular indoor quietness that comes when the world outside has contracted to gray sky and flat fields. Dorothea's health was variable. There were days when she wanted to be read to for hours and days when she wanted only to have someone sit with her while she dozed, and days, fewer, but they occurred, when she was sharp and energetic and commanded the East Wing like a general who had not yet been informed that the war had ended. On those days she sent Mrs. Colville on errands, to the library for this book, to the garden if it was dry enough for a cut of rosemary, to the kitchen with instructions the cook received with a diplomacy that said plainly she would do as she liked. I encountered Mrs. Colville on these errands more often than chance would explain. The library was a room I used. The garden I walked through most mornings when the frost was not punishing. I did not engineer these encounters. I am sufficiently self-aware to say so with confidence. But I did not, after the first week, take any particular pains to avoid them. She was observant, not in a predatory way, not the observation of someone calculating advantage, but in the way of someone who has grown accustomed to being underestimated and has found it prudent to understand the room more thoroughly than the room understands her. She noticed the things I noticed. The crack in the east corridor's cornice that the surveyor had marked and not yet repaired, the spot where the kitchen garden's far wall was settling and would need attention before spring, the particular quality of silence that fell over the stables when the head groom was in a poor temper. We talked about these things. Small things, management of the estate, the weather's effect on the fens, which of the tenant farms on the northern boundary had submitted accurate accounts and which had not. She had, I learned gradually, by the slow accumulation of remarks she never made with any display, a clear and ordered mind. She did not decorate her observations. She said what she saw. She did not, at any point, tell me very much about herself. I knew what Dorothea had told me, which was not much, that she had been the wife of a solicitor in Wiltshire, a Mr. Robert Colville, who had died some 26 months ago, and that she had no family of means remaining, and that she had come to Lincolnshire for a reason Dorothea had described only as a matter she needed to resolve. I had not pressed. It was not my custom to press. People told me things, in my experience, in direct proportion to how little I demanded to know them. But the leather case troubled me. I had seen it twice more by mid-November, once in the corridor of the East Wing, sitting beside the door to her room as though she had been moving it and set it down, once in the small sitting room Dorothea used for morning letters, where it had been left on the window seat while Mrs. Colville attended Dorothea in the next room. Both times, the clasp was locked. I am not a man who reads significance into luggage. I was aware of that. I told myself so on both occasions and returned to whatever I had been doing. The letter came to my attention on the 14th of November. I should say, it came to my awareness that a letter existed. I did not find it. I did not rifle through her belongings or commission any discovery. What happened was considerably more mundane. I came to the East Wing Library to retrieve a volume on land drainage that I had left there the previous week. The room was unoccupied, or I believed it to be. I was halfway to the shelf when I heard a sound from the alcove beside the window, a soft, controlled exhale, not a breath of sleepiness, a breath of effort, the kind a person releases when they are holding themselves to a decision. Mrs. Colville was sitting in the alcove with the leather case open on the seat beside her and two documents in her hands, a sealed letter, the wax unbroken, and what appeared to be a second document, several pages, covered in a tight legal hand. She had not heard me enter. She was reading the second document with the focused, unhappy attention of someone reviewing a thing they already know and wish, on review, to find changed. I should have withdrawn. The courteous thing, the decent thing, was to withdraw. I said, "Mrs. Colville." She looked up. She did not startle in the manner of someone caught at something shameful. She looked at me with that same quality of assessment I had noticed at our first meeting, and then she did something I had not expected. She closed neither the document nor the case. She held both, looked at me, and said, "I was going to come and see you this week, Your Grace. I have been trying to decide how." I crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite the alcove. "Then perhaps this is convenient," I said. She looked at the sealed letter for a moment. "This letter is addressed to you," she said. "It was given to my husband by your brother, the late Lord Aldous Colney, approximately 3 years ago. It was given with the instruction that it should be delivered to you in the event of your brother's death, or your husband's death, whichever came first, but not before. Robert died 7 months before your brother did. I have been carrying this for 26 months. The room was very quiet. Outside, the fen wind pressed against the library windows with a low, persistent sound. "And the other document," I said. "A codicil to a private agreement." She set the pages down on the seat beside the case. "Between your brother and my husband. An arrangement by which Robert provided legal cover is the plainest phrase, for a financial transaction your brother wished to complete without appearing as a party to it." "What sort of transaction?" She told me. It took the better part of an hour. She told it plainly, no performance, no heightening of the material for effect, and no softening of the parts that reflected badly on the people involved. Aldous had borrowed a considerable sum, not from any bank or moneylender, but from a consortium of investors whose agreement he had arranged through my husband's firm. The arrangement had been documented in a way that concealed my brother's involvement. The investors had believed they were lending to a commercial venture in the eastern fenlands, a drainage scheme, on paper. The money had in fact been used to clear debts my brother had accumulated over several years of living in a manner his allowance did not support. When the drainage scheme produced no returns, because there was no drainage scheme, the investors had pursued my husband's firm. Robert Colville had been a junior partner, not the architect of the arrangement, but his name was on the documents. His senior partner had died shortly after the scheme's collapse, and Robert had been left to answer for it alone. The professional consequences had been severe. The financial consequences had followed. He had died, at the age of 34, in debt and with his reputation in pieces. "He never told me the origin of the scheme," she said. "Only that he had been asked by a client he trusted to document an arrangement that he was later told, by the time he understood it, was not what he had believed it to be. By then, it was too late to extract himself without destroying the client. So he didn't." "He protected my brother," I said. "He protected the arrangement," she said. "I am not certain he thought of it as loyalty so much as a situation from which there was no honorable exit. He was not a man who—" She stopped. "He was careful, very careful ordinarily. He made one error of trust and it cost him everything." I looked at the sealed letter on the seat beside her. My brother's handwriting, I could see from across the room, that particular slope of the letters that I had known since childhood. And the letter. "I haven't opened it. It is addressed to you." She held it out. I did not take it immediately. I looked at it in her hand for a moment, at the quality of her steadiness, the way she held it toward me without pressing the delivery, without any of the theater a less honest person might have brought to the moment. "Why did you come here?" I asked. "To Ashbourne, to this house, as a companion to my aunt specifically." She met my eyes. "Because I had been in the county for 2 months and had twice attempted to approach you through proper channels and been turned away, not by you, I believe, but by your secretary, who was protecting your time. And because Lady Dorothea's advertisement answered my practical need, and I thought," a pause, "I thought that proximity might create an opportunity that correspondence had not. You did not think I might simply discover your purpose and dismiss you. It was a risk I weighed, and the result of your weighing." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You are not what your secretary's manner suggested, Your Grace." I took the letter. I read it alone, in my study after dinner. Mrs. Colville had returned to the East Wing and my aunt, and I had eaten in silence, and told Fenworth I was not to be disturbed. Aldous' letter was 7 pages. He had written it, the date told me, approximately a year before his death, which meant he had written it knowing it might never need to be delivered, and that he might have the opportunity to say these things himself, and that he was making provision in case he did not. The fact that he had made that provision and told Robert Colville to hold it was the most orderly thing I had ever known Aldous to do in his life. He did not excuse himself. That was the thing I kept returning to, sitting at the desk in the study with the fire burning down and the fen outside the windows dark and flat and quiet. He did not excuse himself. He explained how the arrangement had come about, the accumulating debts, the shame of approaching the estate, the solution that had seemed, at the time, contained and temporary and manageable. He explained how he had underestimated the consequences, and how, by the time he understood them, Robert Colville was already the one bearing them. He said he had been a coward in not finding a way to step forward and say so plainly. He said he had not known how to say it without destroying himself, and that he had chosen himself, and that he knew what that made him. He asked me to find a way to set it right. Not for his sake, he wrote. He was aware he had forfeited any claim to posthumous redemption, but for Mrs. Colville's, who had done nothing except marry a careful man who had made one error of trust. I sat with those pages for a long time. I thought about Aldous, the warmth, the laughter, the easy charm that I had envied without acknowledging I envied it. I thought about the fact that he had known, and had lived with knowing, and had written 7 pages of honest reckoning and still not found his way to act on them while he was living. I thought that this was the truest portrait of my brother I had ever seen, a man who was genuinely sorry and genuinely incapable of the courage his sorrow required, until it was too late to require anything at all. And I thought about the woman in the East Wing who had carried that case for 26 months, who had spent 2 years trying to find a legitimate way to place this letter in my hands, who had taken employment as a companion in my aunt's household, and made herself indispensable and honest and undemanding, and who had told me the whole of it in a library on a November afternoon with neither performance nor self-pity. I put the letter in the drawer and went to bed. I did not sleep. The following morning I sent a note to the East Wing. "Mrs. Colville, I should be grateful if you would walk with me in the South Garden at 10 o'clock, if the weather permits and Lady Dorothea can spare you. Ashbourne." She came at 10 o'clock. The weather did not especially permit. There was a gray drizzle moving in from the fens, and the garden smelled of wet stone and the last of the autumn's dead leaves pressed flat into the paths. But she appeared in a dark cloak and sensible boots without any indication that the conditions were inconvenient. We walked for a moment without speaking. The drizzle thickened slightly and then eased. "I spent last evening reading the letter," I said. "Yes." "I owe you an apology," I said, "on behalf of my family, which I am aware is a cold currency, and a practical remedy which I intend to discuss with you at length, but not this morning." She glanced at me sidelong. Not this morning. This morning I wish to, I stopped. I found, to my own considerable surprise, that I was not certain how to continue. I was not a man who faltered in the middle of sentences. I found words inconvenient occasionally, but I had never been unable to locate them. She waited. With that particular quality of waiting she had, attentive, without pressing. I wish to say that I understand what you did, I said. The 2 years, the care you took, the restraint. I looked at the dead garden, the stone paths, the skeletal rose beds, the far wall with its settling course of brick that needed repointing before spring. Most people in your position would have been angrier. I am angry, she said quietly. I have simply found that anger, expressed loudly, closes the doors it most needs to open. I looked at her. Your husband had a clear-headed wife. He did, she said. She said it without affectation, plainly, the way she said everything. And then she looked at the far wall and said, that corner of the brickwork will need attention before the frost gets properly into it. I know, I said. I have been meaning to send the mason. You have been busy. Yes. We walked on. The drizzle settled into something that was not quite rain and not quite mist, and the rooks in the stand of elms at the garden's edge made their usual early morning complaints against the world. I thought, walking beside this composed and self-contained woman through the wet ruins of my autumn garden, that I had not felt particularly accompanied in a very long time. Not since Aldous, not in any way that had registered. It was an inconvenient thought. I recorded it and set it aside, and attended to the practical matter of the brickwork, and we went in for breakfast. The practical remedy took 3 weeks to construct. I engaged a solicitor in Lincoln, not a firm with any existing connection to Ashborne, which I thought important, and instructed them to undertake a review of the Colville case as it stood. The remaining debt, the professional record, the documents that had been submitted in evidence and those that had not. I provided Aldous' letter, a certified copy of the codicil Mrs. Colville had carried, and a sworn statement of my own that I had consulted with her in preparing. I do not propose to burden you with the legal particulars. What I will say is that the matter moved more quickly than I had anticipated, largely because the original arrangement had been poorly documented from the conspiracy's own perspective. Aldous had relied on his charm and the assumed discretion of everyone involved, and had not thought carefully enough about what happened when charm was no longer available. The documents that existed pointed fairly clearly, once read by someone looking for what they actually said, to the origin and the mechanism and the parties involved. Robert Colville's professional record was not formally rehabilitated. The firm was dissolved and the partners dispersed, and there was no body remaining to rehabilitate it to, but the debt was resolved, and a statement was prepared that could, if she wished, be shared with any party in a position to affect her standing or circumstances. I told her this on a Thursday evening in the second week of December, in Dorothea's sitting room after my aunt had retired. Mrs. Colville read the summary the solicitor had prepared, and then read it again, and then set it on her knee and looked at the fire for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "It is less than is owed. Perhaps it is also more than I had." She stopped, began again. I did not, when I arrived, allow myself to think very far beyond getting the letter into your hands. I thought about what came before that, the approaches, the letters, the difficulty of reaching you at all. I did not think very much about what came after. "And now," I said. She looked at the fire a moment longer. "I don't know," she said. "I have been so occupied with carrying a thing that I am not sure what I do when I am not carrying it." It was the most unguarded thing she had said to me. I was aware of the care required in the moment, that an excess of response would close something that had, briefly, opened. "I imagine," I said, "that you find something else worth doing." She looked at me then. A considering look, longer than usual, and with something in it I had not seen before. Not the professional composure, not the assessment she used as a shield, but something more direct and more uncertain. More alive, perhaps. "Yes," she said, "I imagine so." Dorothea, who had watched all of this with the focused pleasure of a woman who has been ailing and finds herself unexpectedly entertained, chose the following Tuesday to be very well indeed. She called me to the East Wing in the morning, and informed me, with great good cheer, that she had decided to go and stay with her friend Lady Pemford in Bath for the month of January, and that Mrs. Colville, of course, could not accompany her to Bath as she was required in Lincolnshire for the resolution of her affairs, and that she hoped this would not leave me too entirely without company at Ashbourne Park. "Dorothea," I said. "You have 17 staff members," she said. "You are not without company, but you have been," she considered, "compressed lately, and you might benefit from some unconfinement." I looked at her. She looked back with the benign serenity of someone who has arranged everything to her satisfaction and is now simply waiting for the slower participants to catch up. "You are not, in fact, unwell," I said. "Have been intermittently unwell," she said with great precision, "since September. Mrs. Colville has been an excellent companion. She has also been a person with a matter to resolve, and I found when I met her that I could be useful to that resolution, and I decided to be. I am 64 years old, and I am no longer interested in doing anything except what is useful and what I genuinely wish to do, and this was both." She patted my hand. "She is a remarkable woman, Everard. She is also, I say this as a factual observation, not going anywhere in particular. She has no immediate alternative employment and no household to return to. Bath will remove me. The rest is your affair." I left the East Wing feeling that I had been managed with consummate skill by a woman who had arranged her ailment around a plan, and that I was not, in fact, particularly displeased about it. Dorothea departed for Bath in the 3rd week of December, with a trunk and a maid and an excellent traveling coat, and a look she gave me at the carriage door that said, without words, "Do not waste this." Mrs. Colville saw her off and stood in the courtyard watching the carriage turn onto the park road. When she turned to go back inside, she found me still standing in the doorway. "You know," I said, "that you are welcome to remain at Ashbourne for as long as the winter requires." "That is very generous." "It is practical," I said. "The roads will be difficult by January, and you have no fixed arrangement. Dorothea's rooms are here. The fire is burning. The library has 12 years of volumes I have not read and cannot seem to discard." She looked at me. "You are not a man who does things for entirely practical reasons," she said, "and I am not a woman who would be served by pretending not to notice." I was quiet for a moment. The courtyard was very still. The frost had come back in the night, and the cobbles were white along their edges, and the elms beyond the south wall made no sound at all. "No," I said, "you are right. I am not." She looked at me with that long, considering assessment, and then the corner of her mouth moved, very slightly, in a way I had not yet seen. 12 years of unread volumes," she said, "is a great deal of neglected reading." "It is," I said. "I have been meaning to address it." "Then I will stay," she said, "and we will see what comes of addressing things." January was cold enough to seal the fens under a gray sheet of ice and keep the household drawn close to its fires. We read in the library most evenings, not always to each other, sometimes simply in the same room, which I found after a few days was a profoundly different thing from reading alone. She read quickly and with complete attention. I read more slowly and with frequent interruption from my own thoughts, and she tolerated this without comment, which I found I valued more than I could readily account for. We talked. We talked in the mornings over the estate accounts, which she had begun helping me organize, not because I had asked, but because she had a systematic mind and the figures were on the table and it was, as she said, simply the next thing requiring attention. We talked over dinner, which we now took at the same table by unspoken agreement. We talked in the evenings, when the fire was built up and the house was dark beyond the windows, and there was nothing pressing and nothing required. She told me about Robert gradually across those evenings, not as an account of grief, but as a portrait of a man. He had been methodical, she said. He had kept his desk in a particular order and his correspondence in chronological files, and his collection of reference books in a system only he fully understood. And she had found, after his death, that she missed the system itself, the evidence of a mind that had moved through the world in an orderly way and had tried always to leave it slightly more orderly than he found it. He had made one error of trust, and it had cost him everything, and he had not survived it. But she did not speak of him with bitterness. She spoke of him with the particular tenderness of someone who has stopped expecting the dead to have been different from what they were. "Do you believe," I said one evening, "that a person can want two different things at once, and that one of them being reasonable doesn't make the other one less true?" She looked at me across the firelight. "Yes," she said, "I have believed that for some time." I had not until that evening said anything plainly. We had been for 3 weeks in the careful middle territory between acknowledged feeling and unacknowledged distance, and I had moved through it with what I told myself was patience and what was, more accurately, fear. Not of her response. I had read enough of her by January to have formed a clear assessment of it. The fear was the older kind, the fear of being wrong about a thing that mattered, of wanting something warmly and arriving at it to find it cold. But she had said I have believed that for some time, and the firelight was doing what firelight does in a house that is quiet and well sealed against the cold. And she was looking at me in a way that was not composed in the professional sense, that was composed in the deeper sense, the sense of someone who has decided. "Mrs. Colville," I said. "Marin," she said. A pause not uncomfortable, the fire settled. "Marin," I said, "I am going to say a plain thing, and I should prefer to say it only once, without revision." "Then say it," she said. "I find," I said, "that I have no interest in you leaving Ashbourne, not in January, not in February, not in the general case." I looked at the fire and then made myself look at her. "I am aware that the circumstances of your coming here were specific, and that what I am saying may seem convenient or obligating in a way that I do not intend. I am not saying it because I am grateful to you for bringing me my brother's letter. I am saying it because I have spent 3 months in your company, and I am better in it than I am out of it, and I have not been able to say that about anyone for a very long time, and I am not willing any longer to not say it." The fire, the frost pressing at the windows, the silence of the house. "Everard," she said. I waited. "I arrived here," she said, "with a letter in a case and no particular plan for what came after. I told you that." She looked down at her hands for a moment, those still, undemonstrative hands. I did not permit myself to think about what I might want outside of the resolution. For 2 years I had only one purpose, and the purpose was clear, and I was afraid that wanting anything else would compromise it. She looked up. "And then I met you. And you were—" She stopped, almost smiled, not what your secretary's manner suggested. "I have been told," I said, "that my secretary is overzealous." "He is," she said. "He is also apparently incorrect about you." A pause, then, "I would like to stay," she said quietly. "Not as a companion and not as a guest in the charitable sense. I would like," she considered the word, "to stay." I exhaled. The sound of it surprised me. I had apparently been holding my breath for some time without noticing. "Then you will stay," I said. "It is that simple," she said. "It is that simple," I said, "or it can be if we decide it is." She looked at me for a long moment, that particular look, the one that was not composure as shield but something more alive, more present. Then she said, "Your aunt arranged this." "Thoroughly," I said, "and with a degree of strategic illness that I find, in retrospect, rather admirable." She laughed. It was not the first time she had laughed in my presence. There had been small moments, controlled and brief, But this was different. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind that arrived before the person producing it had decided to allow it. I found that I wished to cause it again as soon as reasonably possible. We were married in the second week of March, in the small church at Ashford-on-Bure, in a ceremony of some informality that disappointed no one who had been hoping for a large event, because we had not invited anyone who had been hoping for a large event. My solicitor attended. Mrs. Fenworth attended, with a handkerchief she claimed was for the cold. 2 of the tenant farmers from the northern boundary attended because they happened to be in the village on business, and I saw no reason to exclude them. Dorothea attended in a traveling coat and a hat that commanded the entire left side of the church. The register was signed. The light through the church's east window, which was plain glass and not the ornate variety, fell in a clean white rectangle across the stone floor of the chancel. Marin, my wife, whom I was still not entirely accustomed to saying without a small internal pause, signed her name in the same composed, unhurried hand she used for everything, and I watched her do it, and thought about the quality of simplicity, which is not the same as ordinariness. Afterward, walking back across the village to the carriages in the cold March light, Dorothea fell into step beside me for a moment. "Well," she said, with the satisfaction of a woman who has done exactly what she set out to do and is not, under any circumstances, going to apologize for it. "Well," I agreed. "She will be good for Ashbourne," Dorothea said. "She will also," she glanced at me, "be good for you. Which is, I think, the more interesting project." "I am not a project, Dorothea." "Everyone," she said cheerfully, "is a project. The question is only whether they have the sense to know it." She patted my arm and went ahead to find her carriage, and I turned and found Marin waiting a few steps behind me with her cloak pulled close and her eyes bright in the cold light, and the leather traveling case, which she had not yet found a permanent home for, sitting on the seat of the waiting carriage. I crossed to her. "What do you propose," I said, "to do with that case?" She looked at it. "I thought," she said, "that perhaps it could go in the library, on the shelf with the unread volumes." "As a symbol of burdens resolved," I said. "As a symbol," she said, "of things that turned out to lead somewhere worth going." She took my arm and we walked to the carriage, and the March wind came off the fens cold and clean and smelling of the beginning of spring, and I thought, holding the arm of this composed and remarkable and quietly inexhaustible woman, that I had spent 38 years being the most feared man in 3 counties, and that I was content now to be feared considerably less and known considerably better, and that this was, to my own considerable surprise, very much the better arrangement. The traveling case went into the library. The fens, that spring, were a shade of green I had not seen in them before, or perhaps I had simply not looked at them from the right window, with the right person standing beside me, at the right time of year. The last thing Aldous ever gave me was a letter I could not read until he was gone, and a woman it introduced me to. I have tried in the years since to be worthy of both.